Greetings, friends and family that are gathered there in Ohio to celebrate and, let's admit it, to grieve Ryder. My name is David McCracken. I'm here in Nashville. I was a dear friend to Ryder, and Ryder was a dear friend to me. Some of you know that his affectionate name for me was Big Bro, and it's a name that I will carry with honor and pride for the rest of my life. I wish that I could be there with you. When the family asked me to record this, I was a little hesitant because I was afraid that I would lose some of the intimacy, that comes from being present with you and doing it live. But my hope is that maybe since you're here with me and in my house as I'm doing this, I can create a different kind of intimacy. So I'm just so grateful to be present with you, even in this way, and I'm honored and humbled that I would be asked to share the reflection that I shared in Nashville with you. And as a form of showing that intimacy, I wore a shirt that Ryder gave me, "Release the Kraken" T-shirt. Ryder used to enjoy coming to watch me play softball. And that was a cheer that would sometimes come out from the crowd when I would get up to bat. So Ryder got me the shirt to remember those fun moments. So I would like to begin basically the same way that I did in Nashville, by saying that I would like to acknowledge that I know that each of you is hurting and each of you is mourning in your own way. There's no definitive handbook on navigating grief. And I know that some of you are having a hard time because maybe you hadn't seen Ryder in a while, or you didn't know that his time was so limited, or you wish you had reached out one more time, or maybe you're punishing yourself because you couldn't be present today in Ohio. Can we just collectively agree to let go of that kind of regret and that kind of shame? It's just not helpful in any way to cling to those. Each of us was a part of Ryder's life, some for a chapter, some for a season, but we are all part of Ryder's chain of love, and as a result, we are all linked together through that love. I hope that the story that I'm about to share will show how true that is. We will get through our loss together. In 2013, a filmmaker friend named David Schultz made a movie about my dear friend, the late singer-songwriter Rich Mullins. One of Rich's heroes was Brennan Manning, the author of a book called The Ragamuffin Gospel, whose main theme is that God loves us as we are, not as we should be. That was a truth that deeply resonated with Rich. It shaped his life in his final years, and it was a message that deeply resonated with Ryder as well. It turned out that the film, called Ragamuffin, resonated with a lot of people. The movie is anything but a sugar-coated, rags-to-riches tale of an Indiana boy who made it to the big time. It is instead an honest look at Rich's life that lays bare his struggles and his imperfections, and how, because of Rich's honesty about how difficult this life can be, it enabled him to bring a lot of beauty into this world through the transparent truth of his music and his life. The film struck a chord in the lives of many people of faith and in the lives of those who had lost or stepped away from faith, and it stirred a curiosity in the lives of people with no faith foundation at all who found a glimpse of something real that they just might be able to hold on to. Because the film generated so much discussion about looking at faith through the lens of honesty, a rarity, Rich's brother David, the film's director, and a close group of Rich's lifelong friends, namely Kathy Sprinkle, Beth Lutz, Damon Seacott, and Sam Howard, created a retreat ministry called Walking Stick and invited friends and strangers to gather and dive into honest conversations about wrestling with our faith. I do know that some of the Walking Stick leaders are there. I hope that you will seek them out and invite conversations with them. I think you'll be richly rewarded for what you'll learn about their experiences and their insights of Ryder as well. Ryder heard about the retreat and shared the news with his friend Rob Touchstone. Rob was intuitive enough, and just so you know, Rob Touchstone started a coffee house, a nonprofit coffee house chain that started in Nashville. They dig wells in other countries, and Rob also baptized Ryder several years ago. So The Well is where we had Ryder service in Nashville. We just felt that that would be appropriate and comfortable, and Rob was there to share his story of Ryder as well. So anyway, Rob was intuitive enough to know that this retreat sounded like something that would be meaningful to Ryder, and so Rob paid for Ryder's registration and sent him to Walking Stick Retreat in Kansas. Now it would take a ton of courage for anyone to make a cross-country trek and gather with a bunch of strangers, but it was an especially brave leap of faith for Ryder, who had so many reasons not to trust and so many reasons to be leery of any faith group inviting truly honest conversation. But fueled on courage, which Ryder had in abundance, and possibly a box of Grippo's chips and a cooler of Grater's ice cream, he went. Those at the retreat were instantly drawn in by Ryder's easy charisma and charm, and so they reached out to tell me that someone had attended who lived close to me. Who was it? Give me their phone number. I want to meet them. The people in Nashville know me. They know that's something I would do. So I contacted Ryder, and we arranged to meet for dinner out in the boonies where he lived at the time. 4 hours later, after demolishing plates of sushi and after exhausting ourselves with laughter and life-encompassing conversation, I came away knowing that I'd found a friend for life. I also recognized that building on the community that Ryder was just beginning to find with Walking Stick was going to be key for him, and finding a supportive community of faith was also a vital step towards wholeness and healing. Finding a replacement for his shaming therapist was on my agenda too, and we did find him a much better therapist who was able to really help guide him through all of the last years of his life. At one point during our conversation, I shared that I had helped to start a church that not only welcomed but invited diversity, and Ryder tentatively agreed to join me one Sunday. It was a revelation for him to see a diverse group of Christians celebrating their faith with abandon and joy. At that stage in his journey, I think it was both freeing and a bit unsettling for him. Hold up, big bro. So you're telling me even the pastor is gay? When we first met, I learned that Ryder had only recently come through some mental health struggles, and so he had been placed in the home of a woman who opened her doors as a halfway house of sorts for those looking to get back on their feet after a difficult chapter of life. I quickly discovered that the woman had mental health issues of her own, and so Ryder's stay there was anything but safe or comfortable. One day, Ryder came home to a completely unexpected for sale sign in the yard. When Ryder asked what was going on, he was told that the end of the world was near, and he had better prepare himself. The next day, the sign was gone with no mention of it by the homeowner. One night, Ryder opened his eyes while trying to sleep and discovered another tenant in his room claiming he was sleepwalking. At one point, the halfway house owner stopped wearing clothes. I knew Ryder needed to get out of Dodge, but I didn't have any easy solutions to offer. One Sunday after church, Ryder wanted to see a movie, and I was unable to go with him. Fear of the unknown often gave him pause, so he was hesitant to go by himself. But I told him there was a theater nearby, and I encouraged him to test himself, and so off he went. While he was there, he ran into a group of friends from our church who invited him to join them for a meal after the movie. Over the course of breaking bread together, Ryder's challenging living situation came up. One of the friends at the table, Michelle Leeser, had just recently begun praying for God to open her eyes to a way that she might help a friend in need. Michelle saw an opportunity to provide Ryder with a temporary safe haven and soon invited him to move into her home. Several months later, our dear friends from church, Jackie Holtz and Linda Brendliger, opened their home to Ryder, and for the next few years, they provided Ryder with a sense of home, of peace, of safety, of family. Ryder was changed and deeply impacted by Michelle and Jackie and Linda's generosity and by their loving examples. Their links in the real-life chain that I was speaking of earlier. One of the best memories I made with Ryder was being able to introduce him to my friend Amy Grant. A few years ago, Amy started a tradition called Keeping the Fire, where she lights the bonfire on her farm on January 1st and invites friends and acquaintances to have the experience of tending the fire for 48-hour shifts. The setting is a primitive one with access to rustic slave cabins and an outhouse. There is no indoor plumbing. The intention is to give our guests an opportunity to fully unplug, to strip away the comfort of the familiar, and to open themselves to the invitation of experiencing God in new and tangible ways. Some people use the time spent in silence and solitude. Some bring a spouse or a loved one to share the experience with. Some might bring their children to teach them about the wonder of nature and of the God who created the beauty that surrounds us all. The fire stays lit until spring, as it is tended by a chain of strangers who are united by their sense of awe and wonder and by the beauty of the experience. Shortly after my first experience of keeping the fire, Ryder shared a piece of art that he had recently created. "That is my keeping the fire experience expressed through your art," I exclaimed. "The cabins, the cookhouse, the sky, the sun, the moon, the trees, the fire, they're all there." Ryder's treasured work of art has hung on my bedroom wall ever since. And here it is. This is one of the things that helps us feel more intimate. This is it. So without ever seeing it, Ryder didn't know there were 2 slave cabins on the property at Amy's farm and a cookhouse that has a wood stove in it and a table and a desk just to relax. The sun, moon, trees, and the fire. I thought it was perfect. And it was so different from anything that I'd ever seen Ryder do. I texted Amy Grant a picture of Ryder's Keeping the Fire painting, along with an image of another piece of Ryder's art for comparison. As you know, much of Ryder's art is an honest portrayal of the chaos, turbulence, drama, and beauty of life. I shared a bit of Ryder's story with Amy and told her I was amazed by what he captured in his Keeping the Fire portrait. I had rarely seen him create something so serene, so peace-filled. Amy said that she loved both pieces of his art, and she asked if I would like to have another 48 hours with the fire to share the experience with Ryder. I said, of course I would. I know he will be moved by your invitation. A quick aside regarding Ryder's creative process. He didn't really like to entertain others' public speculation on what his art was trying to say, and he didn't need for it to. He didn't need for them to speculate. He liked for it to speak to viewers' spirits without bias. However, he did often invite me to share what I saw, because so often it was just his bare soul poured onto a blank canvas, and sometimes he didn't know what it was saying. So we would often explore the depths of his art together. It was a holy invitation. In the days leading up to our time at the fire, we shared our Amy Grant stories and talked about how much her music meant to us. I had had the opportunity to work fairly closely with Amy many years ago, and I loved sharing my memories of her with Ryder. Ryder had loved Amy's music for years and was especially emotionally attached to a song that Amy wrote called Ask Me. The song is an unflinching look at abuse and trauma that Amy co-wrote based on a friend's experience. It asks hard questions, and it has become an intimate anthem of hope and survival for many. Even now, 30 plus years after writing the song, when Amy sings it in concert, you'll see women and men standing in solidarity all across the venue, showing that it is their story too. Amy shares her friend's story in these lyrics. Ask her how she knows there's a God up in the heaven. Where did he go in the middle of her shame? Ask her how she knows there's a God up in the heavens. She said his mercy is bringing her life again. When we arrived at the farm, Amy was there waiting for us. Keep in mind that Amy does not live on the farm. Her being there to greet us was intentional, and I knew it was because she wanted to meet Ryder. So I made the introduction and then left them to talk about things that matter. At one point, Amy even invited Ryder to paint whatever he wanted on a guitar that she kept in one of the cabins. He didn't do that, but while we were there, he was inspired to paint a canvas that he called The Lights of Franklin. You can see the lights of the city of Franklin faintly glowing in the distance from the top of that holy hill where we tended the fire. Ryder left the painting as a gift for Amy to discover on her next visit. Here's an Amy secret that I've held for over 20 years, but it seems appropriate to spill the tea considering where we are gathered. When we were gathered for a Ryder service in Nashville, we were right across the campus from Lipscomb University, and so this story applies to that. I used to work for an estate sale company, and at one sale, Amy came in and asked if she were to buy the entire living room set, a sofa, comfy chair, lamps, rugs, etc., would we deliver it? I told her I would personally deliver it, and I asked when she would be home. She said, "Oh, it's not for me. I heard that the women's dorm at Lipscomb University needs some furniture for their lobby, and I hope that you would take it to them and not say where it came from." So I delivered that furniture, and it was just right across from where we were gathered this weekend. So I delivered the furniture to the campus. And so that's Amy Grant. Amy is Jesus with skin on. If you want to see him, just look into those brown eyes of hers. On that evening, as Ryder and I settled in around the fire, I asked him if meeting Amy was everything that he had hoped. He nodded and said, "It was more." Based on my own experiences of Amy, I know that Ryder received the gift of connection and healing and life, and I know that Ryder saw Jesus in their moments together. Ryder cherished his sacred space, which was usually a comfortable coffee house where he could draw and create and visit with friends. Amy's sacred space is her farm, and she uses it in the same way that Ryder used his. It's a place to create, to dream, to escape, and to share with loved ones. Amy was married on that hill. Both of her parents are now buried there. On my next visit to the farm, the hill, the fire, I discovered Ryder's The Lights of Franklin painting hanging on the wall of one of the cabins. Another of our very best memories is of our time together at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky. For any who are not familiar, Gethsemane is a monastery in Trappist, Kentucky that invites pilgrims and seekers to stay for a few days while experiencing the spiritual practices of silence and solitude. They provide guests with a private room and shower, 3 meals a day, and 2,000 acres of beautiful countryside to explore. Check them out and book a visit. You won't regret it. Ryder and I typically tried to go every year, and we even shared the experience once. During one of Ryder's visits, he met 89-year-old monk Father Seamus Malvey of New York, who often interacted with guests as they checked into the abbey. Ryder and Seamus quickly discovered a shared love of art, and over time they built quite the mutual love story. Ryder taught Seamus how to create using pastels, something he had never tried, and sometimes he would sneak away to the administrator's office and send Ryder digital art that he had created. They would correspond regularly, and he loved Ryder unconditionally. And I had told Aunt Sandy that, I have, when she was so gracious to ask if there was anything of Ryder's possessions, that I would like to have. I just told her that I have art and pictures and memories, that there was nothing that I needed. But if she were to come across the pastel painting drawing that Seamus had done, that Father Seamus had done using Ryder's pastels, that would be something that I would treasure. And so she brought it to me. I hope you can see it. But it's amazing. It was his first time using pastels. And that's him, that's Seamus, and of course Ryder. So it's something I will treasure forever. So Ryder knew that Seamus had been in the monastery infirmary for quite a while with an extreme case of shingles. Ryder and Seamus were unable to communicate during that time, so Ryder was terribly worried about him. Then out of the blue, Seamus wrote and said he was well enough to resume some of his duties, but the last time that Ryder knew, Seamus had been admitted back to the infirmary for undisclosed reasons. Upon Ryder's passing, those of us who knew of their relationship wanted to reach out to Seamus and share the news in a gentle manner. On August 1st, the monastery released the news that Seamus had passed the day before, just 4 days before Ryder was to be reunited with his holy friend. Over the past several days, I have traded emails with one of Seamus's closest friends at the monastery, and she said that he spoke of Ryder with the greatest of affection. She shared with me that Seamus likely had undiagnosed cancer and that there would have been no treatment for him at this stage of life. His final days were not easy ones. He also contracted COVID, and he was unable to have visitors during his final weeks of life. It is so bittersweet, but I share this knowing that we can all smile at the thought of both his and Ryder's surprise and unbelievable joy at the heavenly reunion of these dear earthly friends. I'll bet they sat together and passed sketches and held back giggles during their new members orientation class. I'm going to hold that mental image close to heart in these difficult days. Father Seamus's friends have created a calendar of his art that is for sale in the Gethsemane gift shop. I have a copy here, and there is one piece that we think was influenced by Ryder's style. Let me see if I can show you. So Seamus did, a lot of beautiful things, a lot of landscapes. If I can show one, there's a landscape. But it's this one. It's the Holy Family. But doesn't that look like Ryder's style? We think that it does, and maybe there was an influence there. I hope so. The grounds and the woods that surround the Abbey are dotted with sacred surprises. A small grotto that invites meditation here, a statue of Mary that helps you feel less alone on your journey there. But there's an incredible work of art tucked away in a clearing in the woods that awaits visitors who have a little stamina and a hint of adventure and curiosity. The Garden of Gethsemane depicts a life-size bronze sculpture of Jesus praying in the garden the night before his crucifixion, and the 3 sleeping disciples who accompanied him just around the bend. The plaque on the statue says, may we always remember that the church exists to lead men to Christ in many and varied ways, but it is always the same Christ. Ryder always made a point to spend time with Jesus in the garden on his trips to Gethsemane. It was one of his earthly sacred spaces. I shared with Ryder's Aunt Sandy that if there was any place that I knew of that had truly sacred meaning to Ryder, it was the holy ground in the shadows of those statues. And so we are making arrangements for Ryder to have an eternal presence with Jesus in the garden. Throughout our relationship, I love sharing examples of radical spiritual inclusivity with Ryder, and I would often send him links to stories and videos of outlandishly brave pastors and musicians and authors and speakers and teachers and mothers and fathers, people like Sally Gary and John Ogren and Laura Lawrence, who were strangers to us but who were living out their faith in ways that matched their convictions. Over the past few years, this scenario was repeated time and time again. I would ask, so did you watch that video I sent by that pastor in Texas laying down some truth? Yep, I'm having a Zoom meeting with him next week. Say what now? Or I would ask, did you read that article I shared about that Nashville musician's bold new music? Oh yeah, I emailed him and we're going to meet for lunch on Wednesday. Who are you? Ryder became so bold. Some of you may not know that Ryder was an experienced world traveler with a lifetime of adventures that took him around the world. Through his mission work and through his time spent with the family of Rachel Scott, one of the very brave students who lost her life in the Columbine shooting, together they traveled the country sharing Rachel's incredible story of faith and hope. In fact, it became one of our earliest inside jokes. Anytime someone would mention their once-in-a-lifetime adventure to some remote place in the world, our eyes would immediately find one another, and Ryder would read my snarkiness that implied, bet you've been there. I would always get a, shut up, followed more times than not by a proud but humble admission, yes, I have spent time there. On my last visit with Ryder, on his final day, once again, he was perturbed about his hair being so long, and he kept rubbing his head and feeling his uninvited, luxurious locks. I told him that when he fell back to sleep, I was going to put a bow in it. That got me the patented finger pose. You know which finger. It's the last picture that I took of him, and I know that he would be oh so proud to have left me with that image. But now you know that Ryder's last day was filled with visitors from family and friends. I spoke with Ryder's hero of a boss in the days following Ryder's passing, and unbeknownst to me, he had been prompted to visit Ryder on that last day. John Moore has been so much more than a boss to Ryder for many years. John has been the greatest encourager, a rock-steady friend, and one of Ryder's greatest champions who always encouraged him to be himself, to be his best self. Around 10:30 p.m. on his last day, I messaged Katie Gossett to ask if she had heard of Ryder's difficult day and of the possibility of his being transferred to Ohio in the coming days. Katie is an artist and a dear friend to Ryder, and they bonded through their love of creating and their love of people. Just before Ryder's most recent hospitalization, Katie invited Ryder to a coffee and art date where they shared, created, and loved on one another, and I so wanted to make sure she had the opportunity to visit Ryder before he was transported to Ohio. Katie and her husband Jeremy rushed to the hospital late in the evening where they visited for about an hour. Katie experienced the same thing that we all had that day, moments of clarity followed by long bouts of rest. Katie and Jeremy shared words of encouragement with Ryder, and they hung some art, something of beauty, on the hospital room wall for Ryder to enjoy. They were Ryder's final guests, and Ryder passed shortly afterwards. The following day, I was sharing about the many guests Ryder received in his final hours with our beloved mutual friend Adrian. Adrian and Ryder created and nurtured a special bond that found them at least checking in with each other on most days. I told Adrian that I had asked Ryder on my last visit on his last day if there was anyone he wanted to see or to speak to. Of course, I was prepared to make his request happen. He quietly shook his head and whispered, "No." We all know that is unlike Ryder. He thrived on community. Now I can't help but wonder if what Ryder was really saying was that he wanted to be alone with God. Adrian and I pondered the fact that Ryder may have waited all day for that longed-for moment, for that sacred, still opportunity to finally be alone and one with his Abba. I can't possibly close without taking a closer look at Ryder's unshakable faith. I grew up Southern Baptist, so it was God, Jesus, and, oh yeah, that other one. Anyone who knows Ryder knows of his relationship with his Abba. He would praise his name from any mountaintop, and he would cry out for him by name from every valley. But Ryder had an especially keen sense of spirit, too, and he spoke of that relationship in the comfortable way most of us would speak of a friend. Maybe it was the safety of the gender-neutral way in which the Holy Spirit is often spoke of, or perhaps it was an unspoken soul connection that I believe so often develops between the Spirit and those gifted with exceptionally creative instincts. John 3:8 from the Common English Bible says, "God's Spirit blows wherever it wishes. You hear its sound, but you don't know where it comes from or where it is going. It's the same with everyone who is born of the Spirit." Ryder often used the lens of the Holy Spirit in his encouragement of me to steady me on my sometimes wobbly faith walk. As I look back now, I am quite sure that was intentional. He wanted me to find the same comfort with his spirit friend that he had developed, and he knew that the Holy Spirit was often at work in me in ways that I didn't or couldn't or refused to recognize. What an everlasting gift to give to a big bro. Rich Mullins wrote a now classic song called Elijah that contains the line, "It's okay to be lonely as long as you're free." It's no secret that loneliness was something that Ryder struggled with from time to time, and he often invited conversation about it, and his art reflected it. Pious me has always said that loneliness has never been my cross to bear. After all, I'm blessed to have ready access to a good family and to great friends, and I truly do love spending time alone. But Ryder's making me eat my words because I am now reminded of what loneliness feels like, while he gets to experience real, true freedom. Ryder discovered real, true freedom once he discovered Ryder. I will forever mourn the loss of a friend with such a sense of adventure, a spirit of wonder, and somehow, through it all, by God's goodness and grace and mercy and healing, a heart of innocence. Sometimes I was able to live up to the expectations he had of me in my big bro status, but now, when I get a chance to put those silence and solitude disciplines into practice, I bet I will hear him whispering, "Hey bro, I'm leading now. Come, follow me." And in the blink of an eye, Ryder, I will. I would venture a guess that Ryder would say that Henry Nouwen was his favorite theologian. Nouwen was a Dutch Catholic priest who wrote and spoke and taught a lot about spirituality, social justice, and community. Nouwen died in 1996, and though it was speculated about during his lifetime, since his passing, his closest friends have confirmed that Nouwen was gay, and that in his later years, his spirit had grown increasingly restless about continuing to hide his truth. One of Nouwen's best-known books is the classic Life of the Beloved. Ryder clearly and dearly loved that book, and he recommended it to anyone who felt nudged by Nouwen's wisdom, which Ryder frequently shared on his Facebook page. From Life of the Beloved. Every time you listen with great attentiveness to the voice that calls you the beloved, you will discover within yourself a desire to hear that voice longer and more deeply. It is like discovering a well in the desert. Once you have touched wet ground, you want to dig deeper. Ryder's courage and his belovedness was imprinted on his soul by his maker, his Abba, and it was so proudly tattooed on his arms for the world to see and to admire and to celebrate. And he would so want you to be brave and free and to discover some of the wet ground of the belovedness that he tasted and savored. It is Ryder's courage and his belovedness, and not his diagnosis, that has defined him on this journey and in this life. May it be so.